Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is a Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. I'm going to concentrate on one topic only today. So this is a special episode for our good friends Clive Engel, Solid Faux Life and Trevor Shea, for example, among the many Russian trolls that infest my threads and many threads online. Why? Because they're paid to do so. You know who you are. We know who you are. So let's just stop beating around the bush and just have an open conversation. You can tell us your real names. Ivan, I don't know what your name is, but it'd be nice to just talk to you about what you really feel about the war, you know, deep inside, not just this facade that you're paid to display. Now, I have done a video on bots and trolls, talking about troll farms and bot farms and the difference between the two. Go and check out my previous video. It is this one from about 3 months ago, I think, from the 30th of May, and it is Russian disinformation, bots and trolls, a primer. Go and check that out, and it will give you indeed a primer on what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to sort of build on that. I'm going to be talking about trolls and not bots. Bots are automated. Sometimes we call trolls bots. You're such a bot. This bot's saying this. But actually a bot is an automated persona, if you like, a profile that's generated. And you might see bot farms with just whole arrays of, you know, mobile phones or SIM cards or whatever that are representing different profiles that can then like, dislike, share, retweet different things, but they're not actually real people. Then you have trolls who are real people, and you have troll farms that are apartment blocks or office blocks of real people just pretending to be, you know, someone who they aren't, and doing nefarious things that are involved in this kind of hybrid warfare. This is 5th generation warfare. So I've done a video on 5th generation warfare as well. Go and check that out. I think that might even be on my old channel, A Tippling Philosopher, where I discuss how war has moved on from, you know, through these different phases, and now we're into a phase of war over hearts and mind. And there's a new battlefield, and that battlefield is the information space. But it can have really tangible effects on not only how an army does, so it can have tangible effects on, you know, support for the Russian army, such that war bloggers fighting in the information space will do fundraising to get equipment, and it's the same for Ukraine as well. Will get equipment, you know, fundraising and equipment sent to the front line to help the soldiers and whatnot. But this also has an effect with popular opinion on topics such as, you know, Tucker Carlson being a useful idiot for the Kremlin, spreading kind of disinformation amongst the American public to affect the kind of voting and public opinion. But then it can be even more kind of insidious and problematic, where you have troll farms working to divide electorates and to send disinformation into the information space such that it affects how people vote. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Try and set aside what your feelings are about election meddling. I'm not talking about collusion. That's a whole different subject. I'm going to talk about election meddling, which all the social media companies have admitted happened from 2016 onwards. And it is still a huge issue. We're going to talk about the Internet Research Agency, the employers probably of many of our trolls on these threads. And we know that there are trolls on these threads because when Putin, when Prigozhin tried his mutiny to eventually possibly try and unseat Putin, but I don't think it was ever intended to be that, he then, you know, ended up going to Belarus. All his corporate arms were kind of shut down, and he ended up being obviously assassinated, and the Internet Troll Agency was shut down, and we had no trolls on the threads for like 4 days, and then they came back. You know, obviously they're now just being paid by central government or by another kind of shell company, if you like, but so they, you know, they exist, and they exist here. I think this is a great little introduction to the subject today. So this is a BBC segment It's a 10-minute long video on the bloggers selling Russia's war. So this is the Z bloggers or the Russian military bloggers. I'll only play you the opening section.
In June, an unusual group of people gathered in the Kremlin.
That guy with the long ginger beard there is War Gonzo.
They were Russia's pro-war social media influencers, and President Vladimir Putin wanted to see them. They were allowed to ask questions.
So how is it that the enemy drones reach the Kremlin, was a question to Putin. That's Kotz, who's got a massive following. How is it the enemy drones reach the Kremlin?
But Putin also had a favor to ask.
So this is Putin speaking. He says the information space is a crucial battlefield. And I really count on your help.
Who are these people? And why did Putin ask for help?
So these people are people who are helping Putin in what he calls the battlefield. And this is a battlefield of the information space. And this is fifth generation warfare. Who is fighting this? Well, a lot of people. You can argue that I am fighting this on behalf of the Ukrainians. And in a sense, I am. Because I am pro-Ukrainian from a moral point of view. And I'm helping to fundraise for certain charities that support the Ukrainian effort, and I donate myself, and I'm spreading information, but I'm trying to do it really accurately. So this isn't propaganda. I am just being as truthful as I can, whilst also saying I support the Ukrainians, but I'm not going to lie to you because I can't do that. It's not in my DNA. It's not part of my philosophical background. Like, it's all about accuracy for me. But I have to check myself sometimes to make sure that I am not suffering from biases. We all do, unfortunately, but it's about trying to mitigate those biases as much as possible. And I strive to be accurate. This isn't disinformation, but it is part of the information space and therefore part of the battlefield landscape. Now, you look at people who are telling me this morning, hey, check out Weaponizing, who's another mapper that does the same sort of thing as me. But I just, and I don't, this is not a big, I'm not having a dig at Weeby. I don't want a public spat or anything. However, this is something he said. This is reposted by Suryak, the pro-Russian mapper, who I think is basically employed by the MOD, Russian MOD, toes a party line. And yeah, it seems to be very much linked. Anyway, Weaponizing today has said, unpopular opinion. Underestimating Russia and its military capabilities and acting like Ukraine's offensive is a major success is worse than saying the truth about the situation and realizing that war is not a war that should end militarily, but one that should end diplomatically. So this is the appeasement approach. The morale hit on the Ukrainian soldiers once they see that ones they're fighting aren't low morale, poorly equipped Russian conscripts who will surrender as soon as they see combat. But instead, they meet soldiers who are trained and experienced with modern equipment fighting back from heavily fortified position. Now, there's elements of truth to this, but this does look very much like Russian propaganda. I'm not saying to overestimate Russian capabilities because we've seen throughout the war that there definitely are some very finite limits to their capabilities. It's trying to be moderate here, but also saying, of course, there are finite limits to their capabilities. That's an obvious thing to say. But these capabilities seem to grow by the day. So he's saying the Russian capabilities are just getting better and better. Why would you say that? Where's the evidence for that? Anyway, so for the people who spread this propaganda, the impression I'm getting is that those people, so these are pro-Ukrainians, don't want to see Ukraine win, not for peace in Ukraine, but instead just to prolong the war. It's like, you don't want Ukraine to win. He's effectively talking to me. You don't want to see Ukraine win. You just want to prolong the war. No, I don't. Absolutely, that's wrong. Neither side is currently willing to negotiate because the terms are so absurd. It's time to take some realistic looks at the situation. If you refuse to talk, you'll never find peace. So my appeal is to world leaders to stop the narrative wars aren't won by words but by weapons and change it to wars don't end on the field, they end on the table. Yes, they do end on the table, but this war will only end on the table once Ukraine has done everything it can to possibly get into the most advantageous position on the battlefield. To enter the negotiation period with a strong hand, right? So there's elements to what he says here which is true, and the elements that just complete Russian talking points. And then you just, I go back and look at the names of his videos and look at it's always concentrate on the little things. He does the Daily Mail, Daily Express thing, which is UK tabloid newspapers, which is capitalize certain words. It's something that really infuriates me. But anyway, Zelensky, have pity on your men in Robotyne. That's his latest video. It's like, I wonder where you sit. Russian counterattack disrupts Ukrainian final push. First Challenger 2 ever lost. These hidden defenses delayed Ukraine for 3 months. You just, I'm wondering, whose side you're on. And you look at all of the titles of these, or virtually all of these. Russian forces demolish, capital letters, Ukrainian positions ahead of the third phase. Why Ukraine will capitals lose the war? So on and so forth. It just... Yeah, and you think, well, okay, like I don't want to start a big argument, but I know that you are connected to the Russian information space. I would say, I would put money on that. Like, I'm not connected to the Ukrainian information space. I am just a random, but like, I don't know. So anyway, whatever. So anyway, there is going to be a range of people who are so overtly connected, like your war gonzos. And your COTS and people like that who have a massive following, but also are undoubtedly getting paid by the Russian government in some way, and have seemed to have had closer and closer connections to the Kremlin. If you carry on watching this video on the BBC that I just started to show you, it talks about how they are okay if they criticize the war for not being successful enough. Like, you can criticize the military generals for not killing enough Ukrainians, but what you can't do is criticize Putin and the Kremlin. And I think that's really interesting. Now let's just jump to actually another BBC documentary someone sent me. My mate Paul Trowley. He sent me this, and this is fascinating. Now, I've done a thing on the Slovakian elections coming up, which are really worrying. Okay. I did a segment some time ago how the far right are on the rise, and they are fueled by Russia. And this is really well worth it. If you have access to this or get a VPN, listen to this a whole half an hour or 26 minutes. I'm going to dip back into it because I'm going to do a little bit on Slovakia separately. But this bit is about the information war that I think is worth noting.
In the 5 years since losing power, Robert Fico has become ever more strident. The invasion of Ukraine has emboldened him further.
So this is a far-right populist leader.
Smer and even more radical groupings further to the right have gone on the attack. Their main weapon, online. Their platform of choice, Facebook.
So we're just a few hundred meters away from the historic old centre, the really most beautiful, evocative part of Bratislava. And this is the street where the Russian embassy, the center for Russian disinformation in Slovakia, is located. And Dominika and I have come here because I wanted her to show me the exact place where the heartthrob of Russian disinformation comes from inside this building.
They're pumping this kind of stuff almost every day, yes. So basically the narratives that are trying to undermine the West, especially the US. We can see that a lot of websites or social media pages in Slovakia just verbatim copy the narratives or the statements that are being spread by the Kremlin.
It goes literally into the heart of the Russian embassy. This video went viral when it was released a year and a half ago.
We're seeing a military attaché talking to a person somewhere by the forest, and he's giving him 500 euros for his efforts, but also another 500 euros for his friends to cooperate.
The diplomat was thrown out. The journalist from a website called Hlavné Správy, Main News, one of many that reproduced the Kremlin line on tap, was given a suspended sentence. According to Dominika Hajdu, more than 1,800 Facebook pages share pro-Russian and anti-Western propaganda. The EU and other institutions are trying to counter the disinformation with activities of their own, but they seem to be outsmarted and outnumbered. Some Slovak citizens groups are also trying their best to stem the tide. This is Maciej Czarcik. He's 20, a student, and has set up a training course, Krupica, to help young people understand how propaganda works and how to disentangle news from fake news.
I myself had a very personal experience with disinformation, actually. One of our close friends, it was right after the murder of the journalist Jan Kuciak. And he started convincing us that it's somehow manipulated from the United States, that the CIA is behind it, etc., etc.
What, the CIA killed him?
Yeah, that the CIA killed him, yeah. Then he recommended to me to start reading what I today know are disinformation media. But for a couple of weeks, I was actually following the news on these media because I myself was confused. But then it really stopped making sense. So ever since then, I have felt this urge to help others not to fall into this downward spiral.
And that's what happens is I could bore you. I've written on this before. Oh, in fact, I might just go and hunt that article. So this can kind of explain how people go down this spiral. And I've had family members who have gone from being quite moderate to being almost like extreme right wing. And it's like, what drives that? Are you driving that, or is that the media you are reading? And it turns out, well, my theory is that it's a spiral effect, and that is that So this study, so I'm drawing from an academic work here. This study tests a model of reinforcing spirals in the context of, say, global warming, using a two-wave within subjects panel survey with a representative sample of Americans. Results show that within waves, conservative media use is negatively related to global warming, belief certainty, and support for mitigation policies, while non-conservative media use is positively associated with belief certainty and policy support. In addition, the results show that consuming conservative or non-conservative media at wave 1 makes people more likely to consume those same media at wave 2, partly as an indirect result of the media's effects on global warming belief system certainty and policy preferences. Wave 2 media use in turn further strengthens audiences' global warming belief certainty and policy preferences. Right, don't get sidetracked about having an argument about global warming here. I mean, we can do that. I'm happy to do that, but that's not what this is about. This is about how people spiral downwards, and that can go from the left to the right, whatever, or conspiracy theories or whatever. What happens is you read something that hooks you in, and then you get into that, and then you drive yourself further to read this other, because you want more of that. And this is how algorithms work on YouTube and Facebook and everything. You then get onto that then molds your belief system further to a greater level, and then you take that on to a next level. So I can see with like family members that used to read the Daily Telegraph and be really moderate, or fairly moderate, centre-right moderate, and now those family members are reading the Daily Express and have really quite extreme views. And like I've seen that spiral, and again, it can go both ways, right? So I'm not trying to pick on the extreme right here, but actually, yeah, I've seen this happen. So trying to work out what our brains do, and there's this spiral effect. Now you go back to Russian disinformation. It's like you get a slight doubt here, and you go down that rabbit hole, and then you suddenly get to there, and then you get to there, and then you get to there, and before you know it, you are spouting pro-Russian talking points and sounding like a fascistic, nationalistic Russian. And it's like, oh, hang on, what's happened there? And it's that spiral that sends you down. But it's helped by an awful lot of disinformation. So let's rewind a little bit and go back to the Internet Research Agency. So who is the Internet Research Agency? Well, this is, let's just pop into Wikipedia here. So it's known as Gladset and known as, in Russian internet slang, as a trolls from Olgino. It's a Russian company engaged in online propaganda and influence operations on behalf of Russian business and political interests. It was linked to Yevgeny Prigozhin, a former Russian oligarch and leader of the mercenary company Wagner Group, and based in St. Petersburg. The agency was first mentioned in 2016. A Russian journalist, Andrei Zakharov, published an investigation into Prigozhin's troll factory. In January 2017, report issued by United States intelligence community assessing Russian activities and intentions in recent US elections described the agency as a troll farm. Quote, the likely financier of the so-called Internet Research Agency of Professional Trolls, located in St. Petersburg, is a close ally of Putin with ties to the Russian intelligence, commenting that, quote, they previously were devoted to supporting Russian actions in Ukraine and started to advocate for candidate Trump as early as 2015. So this was something that started out as the kind of PR disinformation front for advocacy for the Russian interests in the Donbass, in Crimea, in the annexation of these Crimean areas, and then moved towards meddling in elections in the US and in the UK and elsewhere in Europe. The agency employed fake accounts registered on social media, social networking sites, discussion boards, online newspaper sites, and video hosting services to promote the Kremlin's interests in domestic and foreign policy, including Ukraine and the Middle East, as well as attempting to influence the 2016 US presidential election. More than 1,000 employees worked in a single building of the agency in 2015. And we're going to go on and listen a little bit more about the Internet Research Agency in a minute. The extent to which the agency tried to influence public opinion using social media became better known after the June 2014 BuzzFeed news article greatly expanded on government documents published by hackers earlier that year. The Internet Research Agency gained more attention in June 2015 when one of its officers was reported as having data from fake accounts used for biased internet trolling. Subsequently, there were news reports of individuals receiving monetary compensation for performing these tasks. In February 16, 2018, a US grand jury indicted 13 Russian nationals and 3 Russian entities, including the Internet Research Agency, on charges of violating criminal laws with the intent to interfere with the US elections and political processes. So this is during the Trump administration. They were forced, because the evidence was there, that they had to actually reprimand these entities. According to the Justice Department, on the 1st of July 2023, it was announced that the Internet Research Agency would be shut down following the aftermath of the Russian the Wagner Group rebellion. Although I bet it's not shut down. In fact, I'm fairly sure of that, because some of the people I think were working for them are still evidently trolling. And then, UK, this is a government website, UK government saying UK exposes sick Russian troll factory plaguing social media with Kremlin propaganda. So the UK government funded expert research unveils new tactics of the Kremlin's large-scale disinformation campaign. Troll factory is targeting politicians and baiting audiences across a number of countries, including UK, South Africa, and India. Interesting, BRICS, part of BRICS there. The operation has suspected links to Prigozhin, and then it goes on to say, a new troll farm that is seeking to guide and brigade a wider network of supporters and sympathizers to engage in targeted trolling behaviors. This information operation and its associated targeted trolling activities are being directed at senior international politicians and international media outlets. Traces of the operation have been detected across 8 social media platforms, including Telegram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. Key tactical innovations of the operational methodology include the use of commenting behaviors, use of VPNs, and deliberate amplification of organic content supporting the Kremlin's position. All of these methods help to avoid detection and interception by social media platforms. So that's to say they take what real people have actually said and amplify that. So if you've got anti-whatever, as long as it's going to be divisive to whatever country you're in, they will amplify that message to an unrealistic position. And we're going to talk about that in a second. And we've got a really good example of that in the US context, using Texas secession. Fascinating. And so they'll do that, but they'll also invent stuff themselves. So there is evidence that they'll start a blog of, I've said this, used this example before, like an embroidery blog, and it'll be someone pretending to be American, right, in the Midwest somewhere or whatever, and they have a bunch of blog posts on embroidery, but then occasionally some anti-Obama stuff or pro-Trump stuff or whatever it is, or pro-Putin stuff suddenly slips in. And if you're really interested in embroidery and you're following this blog, then suddenly you are introduced to ideas that you might not otherwise have been introduced to, and suddenly you've got sympathies that you wouldn't otherwise have had. And it goes to all the tactics they use here, so on and so forth. So I find that pretty interesting there. What we're going to do now is just pop into look at some of Rachel Maddow's book. Now, I know she's MSNBC, and a lot of right wingers here might not appreciate her as a reporter, but her book Blowout, I've just finished it, is an astonishingly good book. And I didn't really realize where the book was going. I thought it would just be having a go at the fossil fuel industries, right? And oil, and how its influence in US politics is endemic and problematic and decades long, and yeah, so on and so forth. But it was much more than that. And it was a look at how the fossil fuel industry in America went to Russia to gain, profit over there, to get itself involved in the industry over there, and how that kind of backfired when they were kind of pushed out. But then you had people who were involved in that, like Rex Tillerson, becoming a member of the cabinet or the administration for Trump. And then you had them trying to roll back Russian sanctions. And after the 2014 Euromaidan situation, it's like, oh my goodness, so what's going on here? It's like all these moneyed interests, and you wanted, because for Russia, hydrocarbons are what it's all about, and without hydrocarbons they're screwed. And so therefore they needed that hydrocarbon influence within the US administration. And so there are all these nefarious connections. And then you throw in things like the Internet Research Agency, and you get the amplification of these messages, and it is so much more insidious and problematic. Now, I'm not doing this as a kind of like trying to have a go at Trump or trying to have a go at the right or anything. I'm doing this as we should be on guard if we want to protect our democracies. Now, it might be that Trump had amazing things to say and was a great politician and was the right person to elect, and he got elected fair and square. Nevertheless, if you're having your aspects of the messaging either outright made up or amplified unrealistically by a foreign agency, then you need to know about that. Like, it might fall on fertile ground. You might like to hear some of those messages because you're that way inclined, and they might sound really great. But if it's coming from someone over there who has a vested interest in you getting really annoyed with that message and then reflecting that in your voting, then that is another country meddling in your head, let alone in your elections. So we're going to have a little look at this. So this is a book we're going to dip into a little bit. We're going to dip into the audiobook. I would listen to it twice as quickly, so sorry it's going to be going at the speed you'd normally read. I mean, when you've got a book that's 4.8 and it has 10,180 ratings, that is a phenomenally good book, right? I can tell you this from being an author myself. I dream of A, that many people buy my books, and B, it being that well received. This is a good book. And I think she does a really good job of tying things up and taking it in a direction I wasn't expected. Remember, I've just written an article that does a little bit of investigation into following the money from Russia to Orban and Hungary, and from Hungary through, for one example, is through Tucker Carlson's dad, who sits on the board for a lobbying organization who one of their clients is Orban's Hungary, right? So Tucker Carlson's dad is receiving money from Orban and therefore from Russia, and then you have Tucker Carlson having pro-Russian talking points. Well, okay, does that explain why Tucker Carlson says what he says? Why he goes and has an interview with Viktor Orban? Why he goes and has an interview with the Serbian president, and the Serbian president is lining up pretty women to shake his hands and make him feel all like he's top of the world? This is all manipulation. So why is Tucker Carlson saying what he says? Why does a Heritage Foundation say what it says? Well, actually, it's getting funding. It's going into relationship and a partnership with the Danube Institute and the Bethany Foundation that get their money from Orban directly, and therefore from the Hungarian government that then gets its funding from Russia. In fact, they get funding from the propaganda arm. It's literally like, I forget what it is, but it's literally, this is money for Hungarian propaganda. Finds its way to Heritage Foundation, and the Heritage Foundation come out with pro-Putin appeasement. You're like, okay, so follow the money. So it's all this insidious fifth generation warfare elements of kind of trying to control the information space. Here we've got, Carlson, and now on Twitter or X, but previously on Fox News, then spouting those kind of views, and we need to be questioning that. Now, it doesn't matter whether you are a big fan of Fox News normally, Like, you should know, having spent long enough here with me, that actually, Ukraine are the good guys here and Russia the bad guys. And when you start hearing these messages that that's not necessarily the case, then you need to be questioning what the motivation is for them saying that and where that impetus is coming from. And the impetus is effectively coming from the Kremlin, really, at base, but through often a strangled path. Right, let's go and listen to a bit of Blowouts. Now, we're going to join the book towards the end, where she's giving details about a conference that took place in St. Petersburg some years back. And it was a conference for the far right, but it was kind of so extreme. It was like a Russian conservative conference, but it was so extreme that actually a lot of far right leaders in the EU, like Marine Le Pen, refused to go, even though she was getting banking money from or money from Russian banks and whatnot. But so it was a collection of quite obscure far rightists, including like Nick Griffin from the UK, formerly of the British National Party. And anyway, so she's going to talk about this, and that be a kind of segue into where we're going.
The first annual forum had been deemed by disinterested observers ineffectual and pathetic. The flotsam and jetsam of right-wing fringe groups, Anna Nemtsova called the attendees in the Daily Beast, this confab was for losers, who can feel, in Russia, like they found people who really understand and sympathize with them. The whole scene invited more mockery than scorn, especially when it came to the sidebar participants like Nathan Smith, who called himself the foreign minister of the Texas nationalist movement, a group advocating for the secession and reestablishment of an independent Republic of Texas.
And I think Rachel Maddow does an interesting thing here, which is taking one element of this and saying, well, okay, here's one guy that turned up who was speaking at the conference, and he was from the Texas secession, like some Texas independence group, and it is using that as a vehicle into seeing what the Internet Research Agency do.
Nathan Smith made very little impression at the forum itself, his Texas-sized cowboy hat notwithstanding. He was not among the 24 featured speakers, but he did take some time to explain to local reporters the ideals of this secession movement in Texas and how the U.S. government was trying to artificially create the American identity. He was quoted in the Russian online newspaper Vzglad. Texans need independence because we have a completely different vision of the world and of politics, and we are not at all in agreement with the policy of the U.S. federal government. Today in power, there are simply no people who represent the interests of the people of Texas. At the same time, we pay taxes that go up to Washington. Tell me, why do we need to belong to the United States? The Texas secessionists were 250,000 strong, Smith insisted, and could point to comments by a recent governor of the state as more or less official proof that the movement was as serious as a heart attack. When we came in the Union in 1845, one of the issues was that we would be able to leave if we decided to do that, Rick Perry had asserted, without benefit of any factual underpinning. My hope is that America and Washington in particular pays attention. We've got a great union. There's absolutely no reason to dissolve it. But if Washington continues to thumb their nose at the American people, who knows what may come out of that? Governor Perry had since walked that back a bit, but not exactly all the way. Most Americans might have understood that as Rick Perry being Rick Perry, flirting with Texas bad boy chauvinism in the hopes of distracting people from the fact that he was about to attempt to run for president while simultaneously being under felony criminal indictment. Oops. But today's stupid political machismo stunt might become tomorrow's international flying wedge. And so Putin's government threw in with the wingnut Texans. Not to mention separatists you could find in Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Catalonia, to name a few. Russia likened their desire for independence to that of the Russian speakers in Crimea, which Russia had heroically broken away from Ukraine, and in the Donbas, which Russia was trying to break away from Ukraine.
So I have tried to do this video several times, and YouTube is not having any of me using the audiobook excerpts from that. So I'm going to have to read this and re-upload it for the third time. So apologies that you don't get the dulcet tones of Rachel Maddow, but you do get my dulcet tones. Anyway, as mentioned, we joined this where there has been this conservative conference in St. Petersburg. Okay, by the time a fake bomb threat broke up the conference, police suspected the call had actually come from one of the attendees trying to drum up a little press. The first annual forum had been deemed by disinterested observers ineffectual and pathetic. Quote, the flotsam and jetsam of right-wing fringe groups. Anna Nemtsova called the attendees in the Daily Beast. This confab was for losers who can feel in Russia they found people who really understand and sympathise with them. The whole scene invited more mockery than scorn, especially when it came to the sidebar participants like Nathan Smith, the foreign minister of the Texas nationalist movement, a group advocating for the secession and re-establishment of an independent Republic of Texas. Smith made very little impression in the forum itself, his Texas-sized cowboy hat notwithstanding. He was not among the 24 featured speakers, but he did take some time to explain to local reporters the ideals of this secession movement in Texas and how the US government was trying to artificially create the American identity. Texans need independence because we have a completely different vision of the world and of politics, and we are not all in agreement with the policy of the US federal government, Smith was quoted in a local newspaper. Today, in power, there are simply no people who represent the interests of the people of Texas. At the same time, we pay taxes that go up to Washington. Tell me, why do we need to belong to the United States? The Texas secessionists were 250,000 strong, Smith insisted, and could point to comments by a recent governor of the state as more or less official proof that the movement was serious as a heart attack. Quote, when we came in the Union in 1845, one of the issues was that we would be able to leave, and we've decided to do that, Rick Perry had asserted, without benefit of factual underpinning. You know, my hope is that America, and Washington in particular, pays attention. We've got a great union. There's absolutely no reason to dissolve it. But if Washington continues to thumb their nose at the American people, you know, who knows what may come out of that. He had since walked that back a bit, but not exactly all the way. Most Americans might have understood that as Rick Perry being Rick Perry, flirting with Texas bad boy chauvinism in the hopes of distracting people from the fact that he was about to attempt to run for president while under felony criminal indictment. Oops. But today's stupid political machismo stunt might become tomorrow's international flying wedge. And so Putin's government threw in with the wingnut Texans. Russia likened their desire for independence, not to mention the wishes of separatists you could find in Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Catalonia, to name a few, to that of the Russian speakers in Crimea, which Russia had heroically broken away from Ukraine, and in the Donbass, which Russia was trying to break away from Ukraine. Almost nobody in the West took much notice of the sudden explosion in Free Texas tweets in the wake of that garrulous interview with the Republic of Texas's foreign minister, Nathan Smith, in St. Petersburg in March 2015. Politico's Casey Michel was on this story early, reporting the strange happenings in real time, but experts and Russia watchers in the West waved off all the Texit business as absurdist political theatrics from the Kremlin. It's just another mischief-making gambit, nothing seriously to be worried about, NYU professor Mark Galeotti explained to Michel. Were the Texas separatists not both noisy and willing to play nice with Moscow, I doubt it would get much play. It's just another case of taking advantage of whichever useful idiots happen to present themselves. Maybe in an earlier age, but this was a different time, a moment when Vladimir Putin had growing, urgent, and increasingly hostile geopolitical imperatives, and when his intelligence apparatchiks were beginning to understand the power of certain new political tools at their disposal. Those Free Texas tweets were the first little pinholes that allowed a glimpse of a really weird future to come. To see how and where that future was being charted, to see how the freakish, the virulent, and the ugly were being weaponized for new uses, all you'd have to do is hail a cab under the portico of the St. Petersburg Holiday Inn that March day and ride 10 miles north to the squat 4-story office building at 55 Savishkina, home of the Internet Research Agency. So this next chapter is where we're going to have a little look at the Internet Research Agency, but that gives you just a little understanding of what they do, which is to find a group that's going to sow discord amongst the political or, population, the electorate, and pile in and support that. It can be on the left, it can be on the right, it can be wherever. And in fact, sometimes there are claims that it's on both the left and the right. Is support both sides at the extremes so that they fight each other, rather than go for an overwhelming, solid victory of some kind of moderate candidate or something like that. You want to be, this is Russia using their influence in a really efficient way. So the amount of money it costs to do something like this is negligible compared to the amount of money it costs to do a war. You look at what's happened in Ukraine, and actually Russia have had much better success off the battlefield for much, much, much less money. Like the expenditure on places like the Internet Research Agency compared to the expenditure on this war, they're just two different universes, right? So it's really, really effective. The dark heavy drapes were pulled tight on the windows day and night so 55 Savoshkina was a mystery even to the people who lived and worked in the neighbourhood, a subject to much gossip and speculation. There were suspicions that the Internet Research Agency was a 7-day-a-week, round-the-clock operation, but outsiders didn't know the half of it. There were only a few minutes a day when the hundreds of laptops in the warren of offices were idle. The bosses of the Internet Research Agency ran the operation on 2 separate 12-hour shifts, which meant if you were in the area just before 9 o'clock in the morning or just before 9 o'clock at night, you could see small contingents of 20-somethings streaming in and out of 55 Savoshkina. They're so cool. They're from New York, one observer told American reporter Adrian Chen. Very hip clothing, very hip tattoos. Many of these young professionals had been drawn to the Internet Research Agency by the ads that started appearing back in 2013. Quote, Internet operators required. Task, posting comments on specialized internet sites, writing thematic posts, blogs, social networks, screenshots, reports. Free power supply. Learning is possible. Setting aside the weirdness that in a country floating on gas and oil, a free power supply at work is an advertisable perk, it's clear that jobs at Internet Research were coveted. Most of the hundreds of young people who worked at 55 Savoshkina made around $700 a month, under the table, in cash. No need to report it to tax authorities. This was very good money indeed for playing make-believe on your computer, 12 hours a day, 2 days on, 2 days off. The salary was equal to that of a full professor at a local university, or close to that of a journalist armed with legitimate facts and a considerable risk of being killed or imprisoned, noted Sam Zelich in an essay for PEN America. Quote, in the Russian workforce, there's as much money in chaos as there is in news. Most all of the fun at Internet Research was in creating personas that could comment and blog and post and tweet and network with people anywhere in the world. A European fortune teller who opined on dating, dieting, crystals and feng shui. A young professional woman who unleashed bon mot about Kim Kardashian's latest naked selfie. A specialist in vintage automobile repair living on a sunny coast in Central America. A movie critic in Los Angeles. And that's what I was talking about with regard to the embroidery blogs that I mentioned earlier. It was an opportunity for them to live a life they always dreamed about and to pretend to be somebody else, explained Lyudmila Savchuk, who in March 2015 had only recently left the company. Quote, they can be a gorgeous knockout. They can be bodybuilders. They can live in any part of the globe. In America, they could live the life they've always wanted to live through the internet. Whatever the psychological benefits of the fantasy elements of the work, the physical work environment at Savoshkina Street was no Silicon Valley startup with foosball and craft beer and office dogs. And indeed, I've called like Solid Faux Life out as a troll on my thread who claims to be a black American, and I've called him out as like, well, you only seem to post, in the middle of the night in US time, and that works out with having a day shift working in Russia. So that's odd, and you don't seem to speak in a particular, oh, no, now I've called you out on it, now you give me, okay, stereotypical black American slang, right, okay, and then that lasts a couple of posts and it goes back to normal, and it's like, you aren't who you say you are, and I've called him out on this many times, and he knows that I know he's not, and it's completely ridiculous, because as I've said before, one of the things that you can identify trolls with is if they for the very first comment, and whatever platform they come onto, that very first comment, they give you an identifier. They say, I'm a single Turkish mum, and I think this. It's like, why would you come onto a platform and just announce yourself with all your kind of demographic identifiers? Like, I don't go onto a post if I'm like, I don't go onto like the Independent or something and make a comment and say, look, I'm a white heterosexual British male, and I tell you this. It's like, I've never ever done that. I never think to do that. So as soon as they do that, and his first comment on my threads was like, look, I'm a black American who voted for Biden. And bear in mind, this was nothing to do with Biden. It's just a war, like, frontline update. It's like, I'm a black American who voted for Biden. I'm never going to vote for Biden again. So you tick, 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 tick. And now that's your way of introducing me. So if I like black American Democrats, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, but you don't like Biden. Okay, so what are you trying to get out of this? Oh, yeah, I shouldn't support Biden. Right, I get you. Because that's what your job is. Your job as a Russian is to make me not like Biden. So it gives you that political division. It's not to say that I shouldn't like or dislike Biden, but this is what they want, right? And that's what we need to be careful of. Didn't matter if you're a member of the graphics team, the data analysis team, the department of commentators, the department of bloggers, the department of social networking professionals, or the rapid response department. Quote, they created such an atmosphere that people could understand they were doing something important and secretive, says Savchuk. Humorless and draconian, as our reporter from The Guardian described the outfit in a long investigative piece early in 2015. The Internet Research Agency was engaged in constant rapid response-driven information warfare. Speaking to co-workers was frowned upon. Talking about the work to anybody outside the building was forbidden. The non-disclosure form was the first thing a new employee signed. Show up late and you were docked pay. Fall short on the quota of work and you were docked pay. The folks on the social media teams were expected to produce 5 political posts, 10 non-political posts, and more than 150 comments every 2 days, without fail. And that's what I was talking about with regard to the embroidery blogs that I mentioned earlier. So, to continue. The topics and tenor of the political content were decided at the top every day. Quote, we'd come in, turn on the proxy server to hide our real location, and then read the technical tasks we had been sent. An Internet Research Agency employee explained to The Guardian in March 2015. That, as a sidebar, that's an article I'll refer to later. Most of the technical tasks the previous year, as the agency was getting its sea legs, centered on Ukraine, looking for ways to justify Putin's invasion and takeover of Crimea and his ongoing military effort to do the same in the Donbass. Daily tasks called for savaging the new democratically elected pro-EU, pro-US, anti-Russian government in Kyiv. They were fascists, anti-Semites, baby killers, Ukrainians fighting in their own country against out-of-uniform Russian soldiers, and artillery and tanks were invariably described as terrorists. The more shocking the fake stories about heinous atrocities committed by the Ukrainians against the Russian freedom fighters in the Donbass, the better. So you see how she's linking the whole book most of the book up to this point is about the oil industry, the fracking industry, and lobbying in the US, and burying seismology data in order that, and controlling Oklahoma's legislature and so on and so forth, and all that kind of stuff. And you're like, okay, and then linking it eventually internationally, and then linking it to the Euromaidan revolution, and it's just, oh wow, okay, this stuff is interconnected in really really interesting ways.
Immediately following the assassination of the Putin critic Boris Nemtsov, technical task orders spurred hundreds of posts and tweets pointing fingers at Ukraine for the murder. It wasn't Putin, but the government in Kiev that had killed Boris Nemtsov. How does that even remotely make sense? Oh, follow along, why don't you? See, the Ukrainians killed him as an exercise in reverse psychology. Shooting Boris Nemtsov on the night before his big anti-war march was designed to stir up anti-Putin opposition in Russia. Oh, yeah, killing an anti-Putin leader. That's obviously a plot against Putin. The murder is pure provocation. The state is doing everything to catch Nemtsov's murderers. Putin's best specialists have been sent to fulfill this goal. There was no evidence, no hint of corroboration to back up this nonsensical claim. which means you just have to make it more loudly and more frequently. The ops at the Internet Research Agency counted on a sentiment that had been invoked by one of the white nationalist speakers at that galactic freak show International Russian Conservative Forum across town. 100 repetitions make one truth. The defenders of the truth can be overwhelmed by repeated lies. No lie.
In the first days of March 2015, immediately following the assassination of Putin critic Boris Nemtsov, technical task orders spurred hundreds of posts and tweets pointing fingers at Ukraine for the murder. It wasn't Putin, but the government in Kyiv that had killed Nemtsov. How does that even remotely make sense? Oh, follow along, why don't you? See, the Ukrainians killed him as an exercise in reverse psychology. Shooting Nemtsov on the night before his big anti-war march was designed to stir up anti-Putin opposition in Russia. Killing an anti-Putin leader, that's obviously a plot against Putin. Quote, "The murder is pure provocation. The state is doing everything to catch Nemtsov's murderers. Putin's best specialists have been sent to fulfill this goal." There was no evidence, no hint of corroboration to back up this nonsensical claim, which means you just have to make it more loudly and more frequently. The Internet Research Agency, OPS, counted on a sentiment that had been invoked by one of the white nationalist speakers at the Galactic Freak Show International Russian Conservative Forum across town. Quote, 100 repetitions make one truth. The defenders of the truth can be overwhelmed by repeated lies. And that is something I talked to you about previously. I've even written about it in a forthcoming book of mine about how fake news travels faster, 6 times faster than truth, how we are much more predisposed to share fake news on social media, unfortunately. And so therefore that plays into the hands of agencies or of entities such as the Internet Research Agency. And it's such a difficult fight to fight. It's an uphill battle to overcome fake news that's perpetrated like this. That is propagated is the word, like this. It just is such a difficult job. No lie was too outlandish, as long as it could at least plausibly confuse the real news, and as long as it increased anti-Ukraine, anti-Western online traffic and noise. The analytics department at 55 Savushkina tracked the metrics, how many comments, how often shared or forwarded or retweeted, and fed all that information to the technical taskmasters for message refinement. And it wasn't just about shaping the response to real events that people would normally be talking about. The Internet Research Agency spread word of stories and ideas and characters that would otherwise not get a second glance if it weren't for the artificial hype its employees were churning out on a 24-hour no-rest double shift schedule. The morning after Foreign Minister Nathan Smith, Texas National Movement, gave his interview across town in St. Petersburg, Internet Research trolls were tasked to weigh in on the momentous succession crisis facing the Lone Star State. So, and here's the example of Russia then amplifying this idea. This is an organic idea. There are Texas secessionists, but is it a momentous movement? Is it a movement of 250,000 people? Absolutely not. Dozens of tweets and social media posts started popping up, ready to be shared and retweeted all across America. And in not particularly bad English, some linked to what appeared to be earnest editorials, such as the ditty, quote, "Perhaps nowhere else in the United States have local people discussed the topic of the annexation of Crimea to Russia, as in the state of Texas. The reason for the keen interest of the Texans to this problem is that the history of Crimea has much in common with the history of their own state." End quote. Sure, I mean, that's what Texas separatists were all about, solidarity with Russian-speaking Crimeans in the Ukraine. In the hands of Putin's internet trolls, any secessionist movement anywhere, however lame and parochial, could be adopted, mislabeled, and harnessed to help run down the West. And the social media fakery didn't end there either. Internet Research soon set up its own Facebook page promoting secession, and it was a hit. Heart of Texas drew followers by the tens of thousands, all of whom could be spoon-fed content devised by Russian agents in St. Petersburg, and in turn pass it on to who knows how many Facebook friends and Twitter followers. Heart of Texas was one of scores of separate IRA-controlled Facebook pages, not to mention thousands more social media identities and accounts operating on Twitter, Instagram and YouTube, all created at 55 Savushkina. By early 2015, when the St. Petersburg Holiday Inn was spinning its international lazy Susan of Nazis and fringe separatists, the Internet Research Agency's secret drive to expand the malevolent presence of covert Russian trolls in Americans' online lives was already a busy and expanding operation. The United States was a key and crucial target. Putin's Kremlin was committed to the mission of mucking with American democracy in general and the 2016 election in particular, and committed to a very modern method. The days of depending on hapless illegals and mopey spies at the UN mission in New York were over. The return on investment had been too paltry, but the American virtual world was wide open and fertile with a new possibility. It was also a fraction of the cost of active and actual human intelligence operations. Think of the Internet Research Agency's English language department as a team of 400 Gucifers, only with quality control engineers to fix up cultural references, usage and grammar, and data analytics specialists and IT specialists, and an endless array of protected virtual private networks behind them. This is such a good point, because they drop things in that make you think, oh yeah, you are from that area, you know that, and they just have these little, although it doesn't always work. When I started this channel, there was Paul from Paisley. Now Paisley's in Scotland, and this person kept on doing lots of Union flags and didn't quite get the, well, unless you're really it depends which side of the divide you're on up in Scotland, but was saying things that were didn't quite fit with the Scottish persona, and he was kept on, Russian flags and support for Russia and all this, like all these comments on my videos, but he's disappeared. I called him out several times on saying, by the way, you spelt that that's the wrong type of word you would use for that, and you wouldn't use that word unless you didn't quite know your language type thing. Even like someone who's not great at language in the UK wouldn't make that mistake. And I picked him up in a few bits and said, someone from Paisley just wouldn't say that. And then he changed his name. Instead of Paul from Paisley, he changed very subtly. Then one day he was like Paul Paisley. So then it was like, I'm not from Paisley in Scotland, but my surname is Paisley. And you're like, okay, so now you're Paul Paisley, but saying the same sort of stuff. And then I called him out again, and he's just disappeared. And I think even the account is not even on YouTube anymore. And you're like, so you can spot them and call them out, and sometimes they do make mistakes and slip up. Maddo continues, the heart of Putin's cynical play was information warfare, and this is kind of like the key nub of it, featuring cyber nuisances like trolling and cybercrimes like identity theft, email hacking and outright stealing. Putin's military intelligence and his foreign service pros were handling the most daring cybercrimes. The savvy, well-paid kids at Internet Research were handling the rest, which meant the English language department at 55 Savushkina had already become the favoured elite in the building. They were the highest paid crew at 55 Savushkina and the hardest working. Even those with the best English language skills had to master new areas of expertise. Learning is possible. They had to know how to use stolen identities to set up fake American-sounding accounts on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. Solid faux life. They had to study up on information provided by fellow agents recently returned from intelligence and contacts gathering trips in the actual Nevada, California, New Mexico, Illinois, Michigan, Georgia, New York, and Texas. They had to know where the most damage could be done. A guy in Texas had told Russia's agents on tour it was the purple states, but what exactly were those? They had to discern which politically connected figures and follower-heavy celebrities sprinkled internet traffic magic dust that might just rub off on anybody who engaged them. And they had to be schooled in how to engage those mighty influencers. National Rifle Association's Wayne Lapierre, we're looking at you. E! Entertainment's Kim Kardashian, we're looking at you too. They had to get up to speed on American culture and politics, and specifically the most contentious and divisive issues of the day. Immigration, gun laws, race, the Confederate flag. They had to spend hours screening one slightly cartoonish but very popular political series on Netflix. At first, we were forced to watch The House of Cards in English. said one of the trolls who worked in the IRA, the Internet Research Agency, in 2015. It was necessary to know all the main problems of the United States of America: tax problems, the problem of gays, sexual minorities, weapons. Our goal wasn't to turn Americans towards Russia. Our goal was to set Americans against their own governments, to provoke unrest, provoke dissatisfaction. And that is that. Now, just to kind of wrap this up, I just want to, fake news travels 6 times faster than true, than true stories. So there've been studies on that, and lots of other studies associated with that. And I've talked to you about that before. Just that Guardian article she's referring to in that excerpt was the Russian troll factory at the heart of the meddling allegations. But actually, The Guardian's done, and many newspapers have done many articles on these troll farms. I mean, this is probably the earliest one going back to 2015. But actually, some of this is interesting and kind of obviously pertinent to what she says because she dipped into this article. But it's we had to write ordinary posts about making cakes or music tracks we liked, but then every now and again throw in a political post about how the Kiev government is fascist or that sort of thing, she said. Scrolling through one of the live journal accounts she ran, the pattern is clear. There are posts about Europe's 20 most beautiful castles and signs that show you're dating the wrong girl, interspersed with political posts about Ukraine or suggesting that the Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny is corrupt. Instructions for the political posts would come in a technical task that the trolls received each morning, while the non-political posts had to be thought up personally. Just absolutely incredible. So to add colour to their posts, websites have been set up to aid the troll army. One features thousands of pastable images, mainly of European leaders in humiliating photoshopped incidents, or with captions pointing out their weakness and stupidity, or showing Putin making hilarious wisecracks and winning the day. Many of them have obvious racist or homophobic overtones. Barack Obama eating a banana or depicted as a monkey, or the Ukrainian president Petro Poroshenko in drag declaring, quote, "We are preparing for European integration." The trolls have to post the photographs together with information they can pull from the website marketed as a patriotic Russian Wikipedia, featuring ideologically acceptable versions of world events. The entries for the Maidan revolution in Kiev explain that all the protesters were fed special tea laced with drugs, which is what caused the revolution. The trolls were firmly instructed that there should never be anything bad written about the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic or the Luhansk People's Republic, and never anything good about the Ukrainian government. Quote, "I would go home at the end of the day and see all the same news items on the television news. It was obvious that the decisions were coming from somewhere," said Marat. Many people have accused Russian television of ramping up propaganda over the past 18 months. This is obviously in 2015 in the coverage of Ukraine, so much that the EU even put Dmitry Kiselev, an opinionated television host and director of a major news agency, on its sanctions list. After 2 months of working in a troll agency, Marat began to feel he was losing his sanity and decided he had to leave. From the snatched conversations over coffee, he noted that the office was split roughly 50-50 between people who genuinely believed in what they were doing. I'm always interested in this. And those who thought it was stupid but wanted the money. Occasionally, he would notice people changing on the job. Of course, he says, if every day you are feeding on hate, it eats away at your soul. You start really believing in it. It was Nietzsche that said, the more you look into the eyes of the beast, the more the beast looks back into you, or whatever it is. You have to be strong to stay clean when you spend your whole day submerged in dirt. And I think I'm going to leave it there. I've said enough, or at least Rachel Maddow has said enough. I'd be interested to see what you think about all of this. And again, I'm not trying to alienate like a particular sector of, say, for example, the American political spectrum. But we must be aware of where a lot of our influences may or may not be coming from. And going forward, what are we going to do to combat this threat? In all the countries of the world, Russia will seek to gain influence in this most efficient and cost-effective way. And that is attacking our own minds and our own beliefs. And we just have to be on guard. So this is, I guess, a warning. And also a kind of a primer or a secondary on the internet troll agency and Russian trolls. So when it comes to Solid Faux Live, Clive Engle, Trevor Shea, and all the other ones, Frankie B and the other ones that have been and gone, But some of you are still here. We know who you are. We know how you operate. Good luck in getting your pay increase, this hitting your targets and getting a bonus. Good luck with that. But is that a morally right thing to do? Do you really believe what you post? I hope you don't, because kind of it makes you morally compromised. But then doing what you do makes you morally compromised. So bit of a dilemma. Anyway, thanks everyone else for watching. Really appreciate that. Let me know what you think. Please like, subscribe and share. Thank you so much to all those who support the channel. Sorry this has been a hugely long one. Take care. Speak soon.